Now, of course, you know the COP26 climate conference begins on the 1st of November in Glasgow under the United Kingdom chairmanship. And as the number implies, it's the 26th edition of the United Nations Annual Climate Change Conference. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. These parties are the signatories of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a treaty agreed in 1994, which has 197 parties. That's 196 countries across the world, plus the EU. Now, you don't need me to tell you that with less than 2 months to go, we have seen some of the direct and catastrophic results of global warming across the world. Drought and lost harvests in the global south, wildfires in California and across the Mediterranean countries, devastating floods just about everywhere. All this a result of the burning of fossil fuels and the letting out of greenhouse gases that humans have been letting loose on the atmosphere in the last, well, 250 years or more. I say humans, but of course, I mean mainly the industrialized nations of the North. Britain leading the way in the Industrial Revolution, but now the USA and China, of course, are the main polluters. Global temperature is currently about 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And if we continue with our current trajectory, we shall get to about 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And that will be a pretty much uninhabitable world for millions of people. Humans are also encroaching on the planet, using up its finite resources as though they would last forever, and pushing back the other creatures of the earth, resulting in massive loss of their habitat and of biodiversity, but also increasing the risk of pandemics arising from viruses jumping from animal to human. Of course, all the human activity has provided 1,000 comforts and conveniences, a wonderful quality of life for citizens in the better off nations and social strata, and also to some degree for those in the global south. But the cost of that in a degraded, overheated world has already begun to reveal itself clearly. Most of us in the richer nations are currently well off, but we are about not to be. And that goes especially for younger people who may have to live in a chaotic world unless we do something about it now. Now, that ought to be enough motivation for action. I recently heard Dr. Kate Raworth speaking on Woman's Hour. I don't usually listen to Woman's Hour, but I happened to pick it up as another route. And this is what she said: there's so much we can each do in our own lives. How we eat, how we shop, how we travel, how we take a holiday, how we power our homes, how we bank, how we invest, how we divest, but also how we protest. She listed the proud achievements of protest from the suffragettes onwards. And she concluded, yet when it comes to our own time, with an extraordinary crisis, people are getting angry and saying to protesters, why are you causing a traffic jam? We have to step back, she went on, and see that we're in the moment of an existential crisis where we are bringing about unprecedented, irreversible change to the living planet. And if we don't act now, there will be much higher costs, yes, for police, for emergency services, but for all of us. We are breaking down the civilization that we knew. That's Kate Raworth. But what I want to do this morning is just to look at what are our fundamental motives as Christians in the face of the climate emergency, what we have perhaps uniquely to offer in the situation, and what actually, of course, might be holding us back. The fact is that Christian involvement in environmental concern and action is a relatively recent phenomenon. Yes, there have been strong Christian environmentalists for 50 years or more, pioneers such as John Cobb, Thomas Berry, Jürgen Moltmann, Rosemary Radford Ruther and Sally McFaig, for example. But it's only really since the millennium that the churches, more broadly, have begun really to take this seriously. And I'm afraid it's true to say that many Christians have been no more bothered and aroused by the subject than the population as a whole. In 2014, Chris Packham even blamed Christianity for encouraging the rape of nature. Christianity doesn't help, he said. We're made in God's image, so everything is there to be exploited by us. But there are, I think, and I want to go into these now, it's a number of clear reasons why, as Christians, we have a relatively poor track record. The New Testament is very largely focused on individual, or at the most collective, human salvation. Concern for the earth and its creatures and the environment is really not there. Now, it's no good quoting Jesus walking through the cornfields or sailing across the sea or telling stories drawn from his natural environment. They're just the backdrop to his life, and they don't indicate a specific environmental concern. And in fact, I have some critique of Ruth Valerio, who I think sometimes just goes through the Bible with a concordance and picks out animals and plants and then makes a theology out of it. It won't work. But Jesus's focus, I think, was on humans. Although that does not mean that there are not environmental implications in the things Jesus said and did. This kind of anthropocentric thing leads in some evangelical branches of Christianity to an eschatological vision in which at the second coming, those who are within the faith of Christ are caught up to heaven and the earth is effectively thrown away. There's obviously going to be little motivation to care for the earth and its creatures if they are a disposable backdrop to the main human drama of salvation. This may go back to a persistent influence in Christianity from its earliest days of a Gnostic or dualist view of the world, a view that divides the physical from the spiritual realm and regards the material world as inferior and to be escaped from to a higher plane of spirituality. Of course, the affirmation that God took on material, human substance in Christ and rose from the dead in a form that was physical as well as spiritual, and Revelation's image and hope of a new heaven and a new earth do really contradict all dualism. But the view has still had a strong influence in taking Christians, actually quite wrongly, away from valuing the body, valuing the earth, valuing the material world. Christians, especially those of us in the developed countries, are, I think, very much creatures and very much at home in the high-tech scientific world in which we all live. Now, there's been a whole argument ever since an article by a man called Lynn White, an American medieval historian in 1967, about how much Christianity actually gave birth to modern science, with all its good results, but also its devastating effects on the earth. Certainly, Christianity clearly contributed to the scientific revolution, which got going from Francis Bacon and with Isaac Newton and so on in the 16th and 17th centuries, by stressing human domination over creation, with nature seen as something inert and dead to be exploited for human advantage. I think Lynn White had a point, and at the very least one can say that a Christian view of a rational, law-like cosmos, created and sustained by God, was an important background to the beginning of modern science and technology. Finally, in the charge sheet against Christianity, I think it's possible to accuse modern Christians often of having a slightly, what you might call, shrunken or even cozy, sentimental attitude to nature. Just think for a moment about how we tend to use the story of Noah's Ark. It's with children. The story is about a massive inundation with huge loss of life because God is angry with human wickedness. And yet we dwell on the exciting escape of a few and on the remarkably tamed, friendly animals which go immediately into the ark, and of course with the pretty rainbow at the end. Well, it's a flood of retribution, isn't it, really? And those floods are upon us. Or a completely different example, think of the typical retreat house. Set in pleasant gardens and domesticated landscapes. Yes, beautiful and a great gift for those who go there. But are they communing with nature, capital N? Landscapes in Britain are so marked by human design and activity over millennia that when we walk through what we call nature, aren't we mainly admiring our own human skillful design? Perhaps turning over a rotten branch and examining the teeming life underneath it would be a better way of feeling awe in nature. So I think it's not entirely surprising that Christians have been quite late to the environmental issues and concerns of the world. But now, to turn to the positive, let me ask, what are the right reasons for Christians to get engaged in environmentalism and the politics of the environment? What do we have to offer? I'm going to say 4 things. First of all, because the cosmos is God's creation. It's good. In fact, it's beyond good. It's awesome and overwhelming, and its source is an ineffable love. I think we've all been fascinated and delighted and awed by the films of David Attenborough or Brian Cox. But within our own scriptures, the book of Job, for instance, in its concluding chapters, presents an amazing panoply of the terrifying and wondrous and actually inexplicable aspects of creation. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? God asks Job. Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. Of course, Job, standing in for all of us, has no answer to God's questions. And the monstrous behemoth and Leviathan seem to represent something of the wild, uncontrollable, dangerous forces of nature. There's a book I particularly appreciate. It's by an American, Belden Lane, and it's called The Solace of Fierce Landscapes. In it, he recounts his experience of being in a great wilderness or on a mountain top. The sense of God's extraordinary, mind-blowing being and sustaining power, his own utter smallness and insignificance, and yet somehow, in all that, the grace and the gift that he can be alive and can be in part of this. So if it's true that we should treat the creation and all of our fellow creatures with awe, reverence, and massive respect, because its complex processes and awe-inspiring reality reveal to us the ways of God, then we must stand against all that would exploit, degrade, and damage it. Many of us, I'm sure, love that passage in Proverbs 8, in which wisdom proclaims that she was there at the very beginning of creation. When the Lord marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him, like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the human race. It's not difficult, it seems to me, for us as Christians to join the dots and move from wisdom to word and from word to Christ, and to see God's love at work in creation from beginning to middle to end. And secondly, because as humans, we have a special responsibility on the earth, and we all know that really, Now, you may expect me here to begin to quote from Genesis 1, with humankind made in God's image, to have dominion over all the creatures of the earth, and to fill the earth and subdue it. But this is a text that may well have had some influence down the centuries in making humans feel entitled to exploit the earth. So perhaps a better one would be Psalm 8. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet. This puts us, I think, in our place over against God's awesome cosmos, but still gives us a position of great responsibility. Now, in a way, I don't need to quote the Bible here, because we can use our God-given reason to see that intelligent, self-aware humans bear a special responsibility to care for and to manage the earth, and to care for the creatures and all the resources of the earth, listening and collaborating with the earth, and not just dominating and exploiting. Because actually, who else is going to do it? And if we attend to the Sabbath and Jubilee laws of the Hebrew scriptures, which sought to prevent the buildup of inequality and showed concern for vulnerable people and animals, because the land belonged ultimately to God, we need to press our governments to control and rein in all those global businesses which exploit the limited resources of creation and the most vulnerable peoples. And we need to find better ways to exercise our human responsibility for the care of the earth. Then the third of the four positive things, because as followers of Jesus, we should care for our human neighbor and for everything in the creation of which we are part, especially the things and the people that are the most vulnerable. As humans, we are not over against creation. That has somehow been the mistake. We are not over against creation, but simply part of it. Psalm 148 is a chorus of praise to God. Humans simply adding their voices to the sun and the moon, the wind, the hail and the fire, the mountains, trees and animals, in what Richard Bauckham calls the community of creation. The injunction of the second command that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, and the example of Jesus himself in being available to help the most vulnerable in society, combine to press us as Christians to do all we can to limit the suffering of those in the global south who are especially vulnerable to the effects of global warming, and to do what we can to let animals and plants and the air flourish alongside humans on the planet. And fourthly and lastly, because we can offer resources of prayer and worship, of praise and lament, as humans grapple with the crisis coming upon us. I spoke just now of the chorus of praise from creation in Psalm 148. Another wonderful hymn of praise, as we sang a version of it just now, is in Psalm 104. And Christianity has created so many hymns of praise, which we rightly enjoy and love singing. We should not stop singing them in the current crisis of creation, unless they are becoming a form of sentimental denial, as we try to block out the horrible things that human sin and greed have inflicted on the earth. But if we are to be honest to what we feel when we see the dried up fields and the drought-stricken animals in Africa, or the lovely olive trees burning in Greece, or the misery of those flooded out of their homes, we must take up lament as well. The Psalms, of course, are full of lament. And if you turn to Jeremiah or the book called Lamentations, you'll see that we have resources for expressing the grief that we feel as our old familiar world is changed into something much worse. Christians now are beginning to write words of lament for our climate grief, cries to God in our honest bewilderment at what is happening, partly confession of humanities and of our own sins, but partly simply expressions of feeling powerless and overwhelmed. Recently, I wrote a version of the Benedicite, which is where the song of the three boys in Daniel, praise the Lord, bless him, and give him thanks forever. And I turned it all around into a psalm of lament, and I thought it worked reasonably well. Now, it's not healthy for anyone to live in unreality and denial. But even though it is painful to sing our sorrow, Christian climate lament will always be done in the name of the Jesus who was defeated and bewildered on the cross, but who rose to a new life. And perhaps we should offer it as a resource for many who may feel anxious and grief-stricken, but do not know how to express it. Now, I don't myself find the detailed apocalyptic images and narratives of the Bible particularly helpful, but they do speak of the hope we have in God for ourselves and for the earth. And our laments should always be in that ultimate context of hope. I would recommend to you Hannah Malcolm's collection of essays entitled Words for a Dying World. Her words, I think particularly at the beginning and the end of the volume, are very profound, showing how lament can be to be at one with Christ in suffering and in hope. Well, I'm sure that the rest of today will provide you with many possible ways to become engaged in actions on behalf of the planet and of its myriad creatures. But as a further immediate stimulus, I'd like us to see the film made by the 9-year-old Thomas Edwards, which was shown last year at the Anglican Diocesan Synod when they proclaimed a climate emergency. And they're aiming to become an eco-diocese. So let's watch that, and then I'll just suggest a couple of questions which we could discuss.
Hi, I'm Tom. Are you sitting comfortably? Okay, now I'll begin. Emergency of climate change starts now. The dictionary definition of an emergency is a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. These are the times we live in. We have to act now and work our way safely through this dangerous situation we are living in. There is no later. We need to do something now. Many people need to help. Some people don't believe in climate change. They think it's just a fairy tale or made up by silly scientists. But the evidence shows us that the world is dying. Our world. This is not a situation where some people can make changes and not others. We can't be lazy about this and can't do nothing. Everyone can do something. As Tesco says, every little helps. Some of us can make a big change. Some of us can only do small things. But we all need to do something. You may feel like anything you do is just a drop in the ocean. But how is the ocean made? Not by little drops joining together. Let's all join up and make a tidal wave of change. Reduce, reuse, recycle. We know this phrase. What about rewild? Let spaces grow for the bugs and butterflies as much as for us. Resist by less convenient food wrapped in plastic. Repair. Can you fix something rather than throw it away? Restrict. Use your car less and walk more. Or at least combine trips so you don't have to go out as often. Resource. Give to charities that work for the benefit of the environment. Replenish. Help bring barren places back to life. The biggest R is responsibility, and that is yours. Grow your own food in the garden, in a pot, in a pair of old wellies. Herbs on a windowsill, potatoes or tomatoes in a grow bag. Can your church donate space for the locals to grow food? Maybe for a community orchard or vegetable plot. Check on the labels. Do you know about the carbon footprint of your food? Are bananas better or worse than tomatoes? How about avocados or your Sunday lunch joint of meat? Some food from the shops you think is good, but the food miles it has travelled are bad for the planet. Think about the water or energy demand needed to grow your food. There is always a story for the food on the shelf. Try and find out what that story is and see if you can write a better one. Extraordinary things we could do together. If we work together, we can get the job done. If we don't work together, our planet will die, and so will we. The church is the 5th biggest landowner in the UK. If we work together, just think what this land could achieve. If you all come together and commit to change, just think what you could do. Never stop trying. Don't stop. Never stop. Even if you think you're done, you're not. We are running a marathon together, not a sprint. Careful what you throw away. What can you do with the stuff you throw away? Can you compost it? Recycle it? Give it to someone else on free cycle? Can you make an eco brick out of your plastic? Can you create something new out of it and give it as a gift? If you have to throw things away and use your bin, please consider twinning it through Tier Fund Twin Charity and help give money to save the poorest people who die because of rubbish. You can do it. You must do it. God made this amazing, incredible world full of life for us all, and humans are wrecking it. You grown-ups are wrecking it. This is just not fair. Think how God would feel. You're breaking his heart by doing nothing. You grown-ups are wrecking mine and my brother's future. It's not fair. We couldn't control the future of the world you inherited, but you can do something about ours. I am scared about my future. I don't want to die from horrible diseases or from starvation. I don't want my home to get damaged in a flood or megastorm. The worst thing is that this is already happening to so many children my age across the planet. It isn't fair to them either. We all want to live in this beautiful world and be able to enjoy it as you and others have done. How are you sitting now? Maybe a little less comfortably? Good, because I hope it will inspire you to make a change, no matter how small. A small change is still a change and a step in the right direction. Please try. The future for me and my brother and all our friends. Thank you.